Aminat, a 27-year-old market trader, being escorted into the dilapidated gate of a Nigerian prison. What is her crime? Selling vegetables on a street corner where a police raid on suspected criminals occurred. Accused of harboring stolen goods, her protests of innocence were drowned out by the system's indifference. She was 5 months pregnant. Her husband, Tunde, worked in another city and hadn't been informed of her arrest. Aminat's fear grew with every echoing step through the grim hallways of the overcrowded prison. Inside the prison, Amina shared a cell meant for 4 people with over 15 women. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, and the walls seemed to steep despair. Food was scarce and water was a luxury. Despite her condition, she was treated no differently from the others. She endured harsh labor, carrying buckets of water for the prison wardens. Her swollen feet and aching body were ignored, and her pleas for medical attention were met with harsh words. "I didn't kill anyone," she cried out one night, but the silence of the cellmate was her only reply. They too had their battles to fight. Among the inmates was an older woman, Mama Grace, serving time for a fraudulent land deal. Mama Grace took Aminat under her wing, giving her advice and sharing her food rations. "You need to stay strong for your baby," she whispered one night, placing her hand on Aminat's stomach. Those words became Aminat's anchor. She started talking to her unborn child, calling her Little Grace in honor of her cellmate. At 9 months, Aminat began feeling sharp pains. Labor had started, but there were no doctors, no nurses, and no clean space to deliver. She was rushed to the prison infirmary, an unlit room with a rusty bed and a single disinterested nurse. Mama Grace and 2 other inmates were allowed to assist. Amina's scream filled the room, mingling with the distant cries of other prisoners. Hours passed, and Amina's strength waned. She clutched Mama Grace's hand, tearing, screaming down her face. "Promise me, if I don't make it, my baby." "Don't speak like that," Mama Grace interrupted, though her voice quivered. Little Grace was born just before dawn, a frail but breathing baby girl. Aminat, however, was unresponsive. The nurse did what she could, but without proper equipment or medication, Aminat's bleeding couldn't be stopped. By sunrise, Aminat was gone. The other inmates wept quietly, their grief muted by years of enduring loss. Mama Grace held the baby tightly, vowing to protect her, as Amina had asked. Word of Amina's death reached Tunde a week later. Distraught, he fought tirelessly to gain custody of his daughter, facing bureaucratic delays and corruption at every turn. Little Grace, now an orphan of circumstance, became a symbol of the forgotten lives in the prison system. Mama Grace, nearing the end of her sentence, found solace in caring for the baby, though her heart broke every time she looked into the child's eyes that mirrored Amina's eye. With Little Grace cradled in his arms, Tunde vowed to honor Amina's memory by giving their daughter a better life. However, the harsh realities of his situation quickly set in. Tunde's job as a factory worker barely paid enough to cover his rent. With a newborn to care for, he faced mounting debt and sleepless nights. He visited government offices to demand justice for Amina's wrongful imprisonment and death, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. Every door he knocked on seemed to shut in his face, the indifference of the system swallowing his cries for help. Little Grace, born into tragedy, struggled to thrive. Malnourished and frequently ill, she required medical attention that Tunde could not afford. He begged for help from neighbors and friends, but many were as impoverished as he was. One rainy night, as Grace's fever climbed dangerously high, Tunde rushed her to a nearby clinic. The doctor refused to treat her without payment upfront. Holding his burning child, Tunde sank to his knees in the muddy street, screaming for help that never came. Meanwhile, Mama Grace was released from prison a month after Amina's death. She sought out Tunde, determined to fulfill her promise to care for Little Grace. When she found them, she was horrified by their living condition. "You can't do this alone," she told Tunde, her voice trembling. "Let me help you." Tunde reluctantly agreed, and Mama Grace moved in with them. Together, They scrapped together what little they could to keep Grace alive, but the shadow of poverty loomed over their effort. Tunde grew increasingly desperate. One day, he confided in Mama Grace about a plan he had overheard from a co-worker, smuggling contraband goods across the border for quick money. He is dangerous, but what choice do I have? He said, his eyes hollow. No, Tunde, Mama Grace pleaded, don't risk your life. What will happen to little Grace if something goes wrong? But Tunde, blinded by desperation, couldn't see another way out. He kissed little Grace goodbye and promised to return with enough money to change their lives. Tunde's plan ended in disaster. The police intercepted the smuggling operation, and Tunde was arrested and thrown into the same prison where Amina had died. There, he faced the same inhuman conditions and brutal treatment, with no one to advocate for his release. Back home, Mama Grace struggled to care for little Grace alone. Her health, weakened by years in prison, began to fail. Little Grace, barely a year old, succumbed to an untreated respiratory infection during a cold Harmattan night. When word of his daughter's death reached Tunde in prison, he collapsed in despair. The guards, indifferent to his anguish, dragged him back to his cell. This is a story that happened in a land where justice is a privilege and hope is a fleeting dream. The circle of despair consumes even the innocent. Amina's story, Tunde's fall, and little Grace's brief light are not isolated tragedies, but reflection of a broken system that claims more lives each day. Follow for more stories.